we'll just have to see. Right, so I'm going to start broadcasting now. So we should start seeing people come in and join us. Welcome to everyone who is joining us this morning. You will see Mayram, Kevin and myself at the sorry, whenever I make it live on YouTube, I then just hear a delayed voice of mine talking, which is very distracting, but I've stopped. So yeah, we have capacity for 100 people to join us via Zoom, and then the rest had an email, or everyone had an email. Good morning, Alicia. Nice to see people joining. As you join, do feel free to say hello. If you put in your organisation that you're from as well, that would be great, so we can kind of get a big interaction going between us, because I'm sure alongside what we will share in terms of best practice, I'm sure you guys and your organisations will be doing different things too. So it's always great to learn from each other. And if there are some good suggestions in there, what I'll do is I'll share the chat round at the end in a wrap up email so that you've got that. Morning, Paul and Kerry. Thanks for coming. So yes, so we'll just give a couple more minutes until we get up to capacity, and then other people will be joining via YouTube. Morning, Karen. So we'll everyone that is joining, I'm sure everyone's used Zoom before by now. It's the staple of our lives. But if you just look along your bottom, open up your chat section, and then most of you are all doing really well anyway. But anyone that can't see the comments that are coming through, if you just click on the chat option and change from all panelists to all panelists and attendees, so that we can all see the conversation as we come up. Great to see so many people from so many different organisations, large and small. Lovely. Okay, well, let's get started in terms of introduction, and then other people will join us as we come through. For those of you who have just joined in, I've said please do say hello on the chat, and as we go through this whole webinar, do share ideas of kind of what your organisations are doing really well. Any questions that you've got, feel free to put throughout the webinar. We'll try and address as many as we can. We'll either save some to the end or we'll come back, and then at the end we will make time for any questions. And yeah, so we'll get started. So just to kind of do initial introduction, I am Ashby from Ashby Jenkins Recruitment. Yes, it is narcissistic to name a recruitment agency after yourself, but I did it anyway. For us at AJR, diversity and inclusion are really, really important. Recruiting into this sector for 6 years, and have seen this topic come up probably consistently over the last 5. However, in the last few months, I think with things that have been happening across the globe, it's been brought to the forefront of all of our minds. Throughout this time, I've been speaking to a lot of moved into anonymising CVs, challenging any unnecessary requirements that could provide barriers to access for groups such as non-grads or people with dyslexia. And we've also committed to an ongoing programme of events on D&I. This is the first of which, but we're very keen that we don't lose momentum on this. So there will be others coming up in the next kind of 6 months or so. So we can kind of keep top of all changes and things like that. Alongside this, we obviously want to work really closely with charities to help and support you, as well as learn best practice from you. So as I said, please do share some of your great stuff in the chat. And in regards to the panel, so I'm being joined by 2 wonderful people from organisations who've been doing some great work. So Mayram is the High Value Relationships Lead at MenCap, heading up a team of 6, and you've been in the charity sector for 15 years, haven't you, Mayram? You've got some great experience.
I've been around for a while now, I think.
And you still love it every single day, especially when it's so busy.
Yes.
And so just for those of you who don't know, MenCap has an active equality, diversity and inclusion steering group, and as part of their interview process, they require all applicants to meet with their people with learning disabilities panel to ensure potential candidates are fully committed to diversity in the work that they do. And Mayram, that's been going on for years, hasn't it? It's not a new thing that's been set up.
No, it's not a new thing. So obviously we support people with learning disabilities and are really passionate about making that the forefront of everything we do. So I guess we practice what we preach, and we get our beneficiaries involved with our recruitment right through to our campaigns, and support them with employment as well.
Great, wonderful. And Kevin has been at the Children's Society, so Kevin is joining us, or Kev. I'll probably switch between the two depending on how I kind of get with it. But
Yeah.
2 years. I have got your permission for that though, Kev. Don't worry, everyone. I'm not just being overly familiar. So you've recently moved into a philanthropy officer role within the organisation. He's worked in the charity sector for over 3 years, including functions within supporter care and fundraising, and has been volunteering in the sector for many more years than that. Kevin was responsible for setting up the BAME network at TCS and has been liaising with the diversity and talent team in the charity, who've also been doing some really great work. And alongside this, Kevin is upwardly mentoring his CEO, Mark Russell, about the experience of being a Black man and racial diversity. Mark and Kevin gave a really interesting speech at an internal meeting last month about Black Lives Matters, and it was made into a blog, which I will send the link around to after this so that you can have a little read if you've not seen that. And also, just so it's clear, this is obviously a very small panel. We don't have every minority group represented on the panel today. That is a conscious decision, and it was based on keeping the webinar, I guess, concise and clear. We're not claiming to be experts in all minority groups at all. We're sharing ideas and learnings that everyone can take back to your organisations and implement, regardless of your level of seniority. So if you're leading a team or if you're a team member. We're going to be covering 5 questions between us, and then have set time aside for any questions from you. But as I said, feel free to write questions in the chat function as we go through, and we'll try and come to them. This is obviously a very sensitive subject and a difficult one for people to discuss without fear, particularly if you're from a majority background. So I just want to say, nothing is a stupid question today. This is a safe space. You've all made time to come today because it's something that you're interested or passionate about, or you care about making a change. So any faux pas will be well intentioned, and we can't be afraid to have these conversations, otherwise they never happen and nothing changes. And definitely over the last 5 years that I've been recruiting into the sector, it's been an issue all this time, but over the last couple of months we've seen a real increase, so we need to just keep those conversations going. And finally, just before we launch into the questions, when we are using the term minority background in this webinar, it's inclusive of every minority. So race, gender, sexuality, education, class, age, disabilities. As I said, we're not claiming to be experts on the nuances and challenges facing each group, but we wanted to cover all of these so that when you're going back to your organisations, you can kind of keep everything in mind. And I think working together across minority groups is sometimes more effective at kind of making changes systemically. So yes, that's all. Guys, anything else that you want to add initially before we go into the conversations?
No, I think you summarised well.
I think we're ready to start.
Lovely. Okay, let's do this then. So first question was the considerations you have to make when you're hiring a diverse team. So Mayram, shall we start with you for this one on your initial thoughts, and then we'll go between Kev and I as well?
Yes, so for me, when I'm recruiting in general, it's all about the skills and experience of that individual rather than their background or their race. It's really important for me to also have a diverse team that's very open-minded, and it's looking at, you know, where you can support people to develop as well, because we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, but it's really looking at really thinking about the value of that individual's strengths and what they can bring, not just to your team, but to the organisation as a whole. So when I'm recruiting, I look for that whole, you know, that bigger picture. Just, it's not just about the role, it's outside of the role. And it's nice to have individuals that are passionate and not afraid to come in and say, actually, have you thought about doing this? And this actually, you know, if they come from a different kind of BME background, for example, or have a disability, it's also, you know, engaging them to see what we can do to diversify that culture and the ways that we're working.
Yeah, great. And I suppose it's being open to those challenges, right? Like you need to be more aware that there might be things that you haven't thought of before that you will be pushed back on as a manager and a leader.
Definitely, and it really means that you need to be very open-minded as well and think outside of the box, because life is not black and white, and it's about being able to think in that mindset. And as individuals, if we can't change our mindsets, then your teams and cultures will stay in a particular boxed in remit. But if you can think and work side out of those mindsets, firstly, you'll have a diverse culture, and you'll also have a performing team.
Yeah, great. And Kev, what were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think they were very similar to Mayram actually, but also I think in the sense of actually encouraging referrals from diverse employees within your organization. I think that also goes into sort of that ethos of if you're delivering trust, then you can actually translate that through your actual employees who are from a diverse background already. Because if you're able to actually go to them and ask them different thoughts, feelings, and ideas in relation to who they think should or would be a good fit for the charity, I think you're just going to keep on increasing that sense of trust. And when you talk about what considerations do you have to make when you're trying to have a diverse team, I think if you can empower people within your own organization first and foremost, I think that goes a long way to contributing towards those who do eventually come into the organization. And I think another way is also candidate sourcing. What is the actual pool you're using for candidates as well? Is it actually reflective of the wider society, and is it actually reflective of the people you're actually working with? Because I think, for example, even social media content, in the sense of is the imagery actually reflective of a diverse workforce? Because I think it can't be underestimated in the sense of if you can see somebody who does look like you or who does sort of represent the sort of ideals and the values of what you stand for, and that's reverberated in the imagery, then I think that goes a long way to sort of even potentially somebody not even applying to a job on your website or to your organization. And also, I think in terms of potentially reevaluating your job postings as well, because that could be off-putting to people in terms of potential language that's being used. I know for myself, in previous sort of applications before to different organizations, I know I've been put off straight away in terms of different language that's been said or a way that something's been phrased. And I think even just looking at those small nuances can make a massive difference to somebody as well, even just trying to apply and not.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. And in terms of the imagery, I guess just a quick kind of question for both of you. So through some of my conversations, I believe the lady that mentioned this to me is on here, but I won't name. She basically said all through her life as a person of colour, organisations have wanted to include her in loads of photos to show that they're a very diverse workplace, and oh look, we hire diversely. And she said, previously that was kind of frustrating for her because it feels like you're being kind of singled out. But in more recent times, she's come to think, well, actually, if it does have the effect where a person of colour sees me in the team photo and thinks, oh, okay, it is a nice place to work for someone like me, then actually it encourages diversity. What are both of your thoughts on organizations obviously trying to do that, and can they message that better, rather than them just saying, oh, I'd love to get you in a photo, person of color? Is it better for them to say, look, we're trying to be more diverse, so we'd really like to have you in this, and be really honest and open about that?
I think definitely picking on being open and honest on that, because I think if they're just doing it for the sake of filling a quota, then it's not really going to sit well with me. And I don't think it's going to sit well with anybody else who is in that position as well, because you want it to come from a genuine space and a genuine sense of we want to include people who are representative of our organization. And I think if you're able to do that and show that you mean it from the best intentions, I think that goes a long way of actually from the person who's actually being asked if they actually want to join that, and if they actually feel as if they're comfortable to do it. Because I've been asked to do the same thing before in previous organizations, and I know it's not come from a genuine place and from a genuine space. So for me, that was very off-putting, but I felt as if I could say that and just coming from an open position. But I felt that sort of the the fallback on me wasn't really great, because it was just essentially trying to fit a quota. So if you can do it and come from that genuine space of we actively want to encourage other people from a different diverse range of backgrounds and cultures to be more representative in our imagery, then I think that does go a long way in sort of getting people to want to join your actual organization.
Yeah. Miriam, any thoughts on that?
I agree with Kevin. It shouldn't be definitely not be a tick box exercise. It should be something that's actually quite natural and shouldn't have that much thought around it, that we need to have a colour of person in our imagery. It should be a part of that diverse culture. It shouldn't be a tick box exercise. And I agree with Kevin. I would feel quite uncomfortable if I was approached about that, because it's not because they genuinely want me to be part of that imagery. It's because they're ticking the boxes to say, oh, we need to look at this to look and become more diverse. And it's also being able to include individuals from other religions. And, you know, you might have an employee that wears a headscarf, for example. So it's also, you know, how do we include all of that? It shouldn't just be around ticking the box and making your team or individuals feel uncomfortable about it.
Yeah, okay. No, that's really interesting. And I think from my perspective on this question around what considerations you should make when hiring a diverse team. So it's looking at a few things. So barrier to access in terms of application forms and online portals. I know some organizations use these to anonymize applicants, which is great. However, they can be incredibly difficult for anyone with dyslexia, but also anyone that doesn't own a laptop. You know, we're coming from an assumption that people are wealthy enough to own laptops and own PCs, but if you don't have one of those, it becomes really, really difficult to complete those applications. So looking outside of using those, or using better ones. I know Anthony Nolan has a really good one. I think someone from the HR team's on here today, but if anyone's interested in an introduction there, I'm sure I can facilitate. Anonymizing CVs is obviously a great one in terms of any characteristics. The agencies that you're working with now should, as part of a standard job brief, when they're finding out what you need from your role, should be asking you, how diverse is your team? Do you have working groups? Do you do D&I training? Because number one, then when they're promoting the role to candidates on your behalf, they're making you appear very D&I friendly, and they're then making them feel comforted about making an application. D&I stats on websites is another really useful suggestion that I would encourage organisations to do. So being really open about the diversity of your staff members. A lot of people of colour or people of minority groups will often look to see whether the team is going to be welcoming of them, and so that sharing those stats is really good. And it's not a legal requirement yet, but it's good practice. And I think if we get to the same point in terms of the pay discrepancy legislation, that might be something that comes up in the future. I know there's a question on writing job ads, so we'll come to that as well. I think we also need to start thinking about apprenticeship schemes more than internships, or at least at the same level as internships. I looked on the apprenticeship website on the government and searched for fundraising across the UK, and there were no apprenticeship opportunities on there. I obviously know it's not a brilliantly buoyant market at the moment, but using apprenticeship schemes where people haven't come from university, I think we need to really challenge ourselves in thinking that people who've not gone to university are not capable of writing well or speaking well. I think there's a big bias against people like that. When I was in fundraising, I was probably the only one in my organisations that hadn't gone to university. And when I would tell people that, they would always be really shocked, because they were expecting someone different who'd not gone to university, and it was a strange choice for me not to go to university, you know, that kind of thing. So thinking outside of only a certain calibre of candidates go to university, particularly as we move into £9,000 a year courses, not everyone's going to want to take on that debt. And if you move into fundraising, it's going to take you a long time to pay back, you know, 27 grand worth of debt there. In terms of advertising your jobs, I think looking at, sorry, I know that I'm going on now, but advertising your jobs, I think looking at websites outside of Charity Job, and particularly outside of Guardian. Kevin, I know when we were speaking, you'd said previously when you looked at jobs on Guardian, you felt like it wasn't as welcoming for you, or you had an opinion of, oh, okay, that's for a certain type of person and not for me. So if someone's advertising on there, they probably don't want my type of person.
Yeah, I think that's something that was really reverberated around to me and my friends as well, because even sort of after initially finishing university and then trying to go for a role, I think sort of the language and the terminology, you just automatically know you wouldn't fit into the remit of what they're looking for. But then I found it was quite a recurring theme because I've got a diverse group of friends, but we're all sort of from the pool that I was speaking to were all from sort of the same backgrounds, irrespective of race, religion, color, or creed. But we all found it really difficult to sort of get our initial first jobs. And I think that was just a combination of different factors, and one of which is to do with sort of applying to certain job sites, which I think has improved over time. But I think there's a long way to go. So I definitely think sort of organizations looking to sort of change their language and looking at different areas in which people can be qualified to do certain roles, I think would go a long way to sort of giving people more encouragement to actually apply for certain roles as well.
Yeah, so on the question in terms of job ads, I would encourage you to remove degree qualifications unless it is absolutely essential for that to be the case. I also think around strong communication skills as an essential might be it is off-putting for people who suffer with dyslexia, or where they think actually I can't write brilliantly under pressure or quickly, so can I say I have excellent communication skills? You're blocking out people from that background as well. I think putting positive action statements on your job adverts are important, but it is not enough to do that alone. It comes across as tokenistic if it's your sole policy on attracting diverse candidates. So I think the degree stuff around, really looking at job adverts and job descriptions and thinking, is this actually essential? Do we need to put that wording in? Will it exclude people or make people feel like they can't apply? And in terms of, I'm just trying to have a little thing. And then in terms of advertising, as I kind of mentioned, so looking at places like Indeed for trustees, there's a really good organisation called Beyond Suffrage, which is looking at coaching women of colour into becoming trustees. So that's a good other place to look at. So I think it's just changing where our standard go-tos are and looking at new options. And then in terms of organisations that you've seen create inclusive cultures well, Kev, we'll come to you on this. So what have you seen that works well, that helps build the kind of culture at the Children's Society?
Yeah, so I think even just using myself and my CEO as an example, I think the concept of an upwards mentorship relationship, I think that goes such a long way in sort of, again, cultivating that sense of trust, openness and transparency, not just with the individual and, well, not just with the individuals involved, but I think that reverberates around the whole charity or organization. So I think that sense of being able to upwards mentor somebody, irrespective of your role, again, it goes to show that your opinion is actually valued at the top level of a charity or organization. And I think that sort of is juxtaposed with empathetic leadership, because that plays a big role. Because, for example, having our CEO, Mark Russell, ask myself, as you say, just started in a philanthropy officer role, and asking essentially about my experience as a Black person and a Black man in the UK, to be his upwards mentor about my experiences of that, and also sort of wanting to show and to ascertain more knowledge in terms of racial diversity from my perspective. I think that's only enabled us to grow as individuals, even though it's in its infancy. I think it's going really well, and collectively to feed that growth and that learning back into the charity, I think is of paramount importance. And I think that's also sort of set off a rippling effect to enable those conversations to be had with different members from across the organization, and where sort of those concepts of or taboo subjects such as race, they're now being talked about. And it will be uncomfortable at the start, but also I think enabling those uncomfortable conversations to be had and to start will only garner more interest and garner more comfortability towards the end of it as well. And just on that as well, I think one other example that I did really see is sort of that sense of involving employees in the key discussions sort of within the workplace. I think that's really, really imperative to creating an inclusive culture, because it's great to have sort of lip service and somebody says that they want to be able to, they've made a statement to say that they're going to create an inclusive culture or they're going to tackle diversity and inclusion, but it's all about the tangible examples. And I think if people within the organization feel as if they're empowered and what they say has direct implications and resonance at the highest table within your organization, I think that's going to make such a massive difference. And one example that I saw was the software company Just Works. I found what they did is really, really interesting in the sense of they engaged their employees to actually have a massive brainstorm within their diversity and inclusion working group. And they actually asked the group to think of different initiatives that they think would essentially garner more inclusion within the actual organization. And ultimately, they got 1/3 of the actual company to take part, and they actually reported back that more people felt empowered with the actual cause of the organization. So I think that ties in with the ethos of building an inclusive culture, and I think that was a perfect way to sort of show that.
Great. Okay. And Mayroom?
So a MenCap have a equality, diversity and inclusion group, and our members, there's probably around 50 of us now, so the group is growing. It's open to anyone in the organisation that wants to join, and like you said, Ashby, it's a safe space for us all. We can talk about issues that are not comfortable, and it's also, for some of our group members, it's an educational piece for them, because obviously with nearly 50 members of us, we all come from very different backgrounds. It's very diverse. So we have all experienced different things. You know, some of them may not have experienced anything that I could have, or potentially what Kevin's mentioned as well. So it means we can explore all avenues to really make a difference, and having open to everyone and individuals continually joining shows that actually as an organisation, we want to make the changes, we want to make it a more diverse culture, and it's a place where we can really discuss things that are uncomfortable and how we can change them. So recently our CEO Adele has put some blogs on as well on how she supports the recent ongoings, for example, like Black Lives Matters. And recently MenCap have a new digital online training session called Let's Talk About Race. And it's just to ease everyone into being able to talk about certain things like what is non-prejudice, prejudice, things that we just might not feel comfortable, or even you may not even realize that you're behaving or acting in a particular way. So it's really bringing that to the forefront.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because both of you mentioned around the working groups. Definitely, probably up until, it's always been a topic I'm really passionate about, but up until recent conversations, it's definitely not something that I would have thought, oh, okay, like I can go and join that working group, even though I'm not a person of color, or, I'm not a person with or a different sexuality or whatever. And I think it's so important that we make that really clear across our organizations, is even if you're not directly impacted by this, if you want to support it, or it's something that you're interested about, set these groups up, go and do them. And I think it's low effort. Every organization should, regardless of size, should have some kind of panel. And I guess if places are small, then there could be something potentially that we could do around really small organizations, that we might be, as an agency, might be able to facilitate introductions and set up a small network around it. But it's low maintenance in terms of organizing, I guess. Kev, you set up your BAME one.
Yeah, so I think because of everything that's happened with Black Lives Matter, I think that's in its infancy, in the sense of we've got a diversity and talent team, and they've been doing so much work in terms of bringing these topics to the fore, and we've had different workshops about it. And I think because we're all able to sort of create that open space that we can talk about these things, and I think acknowledging the fact that it will be uncomfortable at the start, but giving people the voice to talk about these issues, I think is of paramount importance. So I think it's been really good in that sense of actually having a team which is based around diversity and talent. I think is really important. Of course, if you have the financial resources to do that, but I think it's important that if you can, to try and have that there, so that there's an actual team focused around tackling these issues, and they're working in tandem with them. And just, I think what's really important is getting people's thoughts and ideas from the organization, irrespective of where you're from, or just getting everybody's concepts in terms of what they think should be implemented. And I think the two working together makes such a massive difference as well, because it's enabled so many different people within the organization to get together and talk. And I think it's opened up the taboo subjects, as you said, in terms of race. And I think what's unfortunately happened as a result of the lynching of George Floyd, in terms of Black Lives Matter has created that open space for people to talk about these issues, and I think that's reverberating more in organizations now as well. And yeah.
Great. And guys, just if your organizations do something particularly well around building inclusive cultures that we've not kind of covered in terms of working group and stuff, please do feel free to share. It'd be great to kind of get other inspiration from you and from each other. And in terms of our own unconscious bias, so naturally we will all have this. I think it's human to fear things that are different or have opinions on things that are different from yourself, but it's also human for us to be able to learn and evolve. So in terms of Miriam and Kev, in terms of what you would advise we can all do to combat our own unconscious bias, what kind of tips would you give to people? And we'll start with you, Miriam.
Have open conversations. So most recently, I'm part of this Turkish Cypriot community group, and as Kevin mentioned recently, Black Lives Matters has been very high on the agenda, and it was on one of our sessions where there was a debate, and it was quite clear that people felt uncomfortable about it, but there were a group of people who were like, actually, within our ethnicity, I'm, for a good example is I'm married to a person of color, and we're in 2020 now, and it should be accepted. It shouldn't be a case of, oh my God, that can't happen. And it just showed how, like in my culture, that it's becoming much more diverse and people are changing their mindsets. And through that group, I realized that we just need to have open conversations, regardless of how uncomfortable they can be, because we just need to start educating one another much more better, and start to think about not box people into groups and categories, because we're not categories, we're people. We shouldn't be judged on the way we look or our names or the color of our skin. So it's being able to start those conversations and looking at how we can get them started and getting who can we get involved that can really start to kind of make that impact and those speeches that we need. So it's very much all around that, to try and diversify everything.
Yeah, great. And Kev?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Miriam said, and also I think in that sense, one key thing for me is I think we first all, as you said, need to openly and truthfully acknowledge within ourselves that we all do have some form of unconscious bias, like whether we like it or not, it's just unavoidable. And I think that one way that we could do this is sort of taking on that concept of individuation, sort of looking at a person and just looking at them as exactly that, just an individual, and just assessing how they are based on their interactions and their characteristics with you, and trying your best not to have any sort of preconception of what they may be like. And I think, again, as Miriam said, sort of making yourself a bit more open and aware, and only knowing within yourself if you're making the effort to go and speak to different people across the organization. I know we can sort of get stuck in that siloed version of working where you're working with the same people, and you might not have spoken to somebody else within the organization, but just having that open time just to get to know different people, because I think that will eventually unravel and just unwrap those unconscious biases as you get to know different people's walks of life. And I think that can only be a good thing in terms of how we work as an organization. But I think, yeah, making that conscious effort to unwrap that unconscious bias in the way that you approach different people around your organization will go a long way.
Yeah, I think it is just understanding your own background, and I guess it's dropping any kind of like superiority around, okay, well, because I came from a really privileged home, or like my parents are still together, or I went to university, or I did this or whatever. It's understanding the way that you grew up, you will naturally have more affinity with people like you, and if you look around your friendship group and they all look like you or sound like you or have the same background as you probably aren't challenging yourself enough. And it's obviously comfortable to talk to people that we all have the same things in common on, and we watch the same TV shows and we've watched the same or eaten the same food. But I think it's understanding, okay, just because I didn't go to university doesn't mean that I can have a bias against people that also didn't go to university and like try and help get them through. It's finding, when all of my team are university educated, but to be honest, I can't tell you where they were university educated or what their degree was, because I look at the talent that they have. And I think, particularly when you're hiring, don't look at a uni and be like, oh, I went to that uni, or oh, that's a really great one, or whatever. Challenge your own preconceptions. And it's also sensitivities. One thing that I have heard from people is around, and this is very anecdotal, but bringing different food in and people going, what's that? Rather than, because it's not something that's native to their own culture. So just being mindful, if someone's bringing something in and it's different from you, or someone's doing something different, you don't have to comment on it. You don't have to comment on people's hair. You don't have to comment on what people are wearing. It's just who they are. So just being I guess more aware of that. And then in terms of for organisations who are looking at changing their D&I policy, I guess in light of recent changes, what would you advise organisations, or the steps that organisations should take? Kev, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think just touching on what I said earlier, but in a different context, in terms of if it's feasible to actually have the financial resources to even sort of have a team, again, focus on diversity and inclusion, because I think through that way, or even through other measures, you can ultimately set up surveys at tackling these issues regarding diversity and inclusion. But also, I think it's really imperative to actually understand what people are actually going through in your organization, so that you can feed that back into training, and also in a sense of making sure that everybody within the organization has a form of training to tackle and understand these issues better. And even I just think, in a sense of having a review of your actual training practices around sort of diversity and inclusion, I think it's become a lot more apparent, especially with what's happened recently around the world, to ensure that training is actually centered around a diverse range of people's lived experiences within an organization. I think, and that will go a long way to, again, teaching different people within your teams and teaching different people the different ways of just living, I think. And also, I think it's important to actually, first and foremost, to actually, as what Mayram said, to have that open space within an organization, to feel as if you can have the open discourse to talk about issues around diversity and inclusion. Again, it might be in the form of a forum or a workshop or a meeting with just your respective teams, but I think it's important to actively acknowledge at the start of that at the start of that conversation, that people will say something that might be offensive, whether they consciously or unconsciously know it, but also to have that offense be challenged as well within that conversation, and understand that people may not necessarily mean it, or may not understand in a different context that it might be causing offense, but to make everybody feel free to say the things that they want. So ultimately that can be a learning process within that conversation as well. And then just to filter that back in, I think, in the wider context of your organization, because I think it's important that people know that these conversations will be uncomfortable initially, and it will be hard to speak about. And I know that a lot of people said that in the comments as well, but I think we have to become accustomed to making these uncomfortable conversations comfortable, because it's there and it won't happen overnight, but it will be a work in progress. Because I do feel as if there's a sense of fear when it comes to saying the wrong thing, especially when it comes to issues around diversity and inclusion, and especially race in the workplace. And I think that if you can get everybody involved in the conversation and to actively understand that it's okay to say these things, but to impart knowledge if you have more on it on a certain issue, I think that will go a long way to sort of improving that sense of inclusion and equity.
Yeah, great. And just in terms of, that's interesting you said that, because I think Kaylee's written, in terms of terminology, there's a lot flying around in terms of like BAME, person of color, POC, what do you, what's the right thing? I guess everyone is different. Everyone has personal preference, right? There's not kind of a standard term you would advise people to use.
I think I think it's very subjective. For example, even within our conversation within the charity, when we had conversations recently yesterday, in the sense of sort of the topic of the name being BAME Network, that's going to be contentious with other people, because that's not going to be representative of everyone. So I think there's no right or wrong answer. It's very, very difficult to sort of pinpoint, right, this is the main way that you should be referring to people, because you're inevitably going to get somebody who's not going to feel the same way. But I think it's trying to come together in some form to talk about these issues, because I think that's the best thing. And also not trying to take offense as well. I think leaving that sense of defensiveness at the door, because it's about understanding where people are coming from, and they might not be antagonistic. It's just coming from a genuine sense of understanding where that person's coming from. And I think, yeah, it's not a bog standard way to sort of say this phrase is right because it's right for certain people, but not for others.
Yeah. Okay, great. And Mayram, your thoughts on
it's what you go on, Ashby. I thought it's what you feel most comfortable with as well. I agree with Kevin.
Okay, fine. And in terms of your input on what steps organisations should take in terms of changing their policies?
I think it depends on the size of your organisation and what resources you do have. If you do have the resources, I would say, talk to your HR team. If you don't have an equality and diversity inclusion group, how can they support you to develop one? Get your colleagues involved, really look at, outline what changes you would like to put in place and present that. And if you do have issues around funding or you're a smaller organisation, then, as fundraisers, look at what funding is available out there to be able to start this work, because I'm sure there's going to be donors and trusts and funders out there that would actually want to support your organisation developing these areas. So it's thinking about those things as well. But I think a good starting point is always to consult and look at what you can do at the start and map out a plan of what you would like to do and what's the end goal and what will be the continuation for that.
Yeah, and I think particularly in terms of including your minority groups across your organisation, there's a situation that happened recently with one charity where they kind of HR representative had done an all charity email saying, we're really passionate about diversity and inclusion. We're going to be reviewing our policies on this. We welcome your thoughts. Do get in touch with us if you've got any questions or feedback. And one of my candidates reached out to the HR team and said, yeah, I'm really keen to get involved in conversations around this. Let me know what you need or in terms of time and blah, blah, blah. And the HR person came back with an email saying, oh yeah, it's fine. It's with the directors for now, but we'll come back to you when they've decided the first steps they want to kind of take, which I just thought was probably quite insensitive messaging and really feeds into that whole, it's all right, we'll tell you how to feel about diversity and we'll decide the policies without being working in collaboration with you. And I know someone put a question around what do you do when you deal with or how do you deal with a challenging environment when you talk about D&I and you get a bit of a weird pushback on it. So we will come to that at the end.
Question as well.
Yes, because it's more frequent than I think we'd all like to hope. And then in terms of, I guess, another key thing, and I think to address is whether the lack of diversity across our teams genuinely impacts fundraising. Because I think through my conversations, people have said to me, until something directly affects you as a person, people tend not to care about it, or they care initially, and then when you're not a person from a minority background, actually we can pay loads of attention to it now and we can be really excited about it now, we can post articles and we can do loads of things, but actually if it's not impacting me, and I would say as a white woman, I've worked in female-led businesses probably my whole career, so my gender, my race has never held back my potential of progressing, it's never held back my earning potential. So it doesn't impact me on an ongoing basis, and it's really hard, I guess, to convince people why they should continue to care 6 months down the line when people might have forgotten about what happened to George Floyd, and we're not having these conversations as often anymore. So I wanted to include your thoughts on does diversity and a lack of diversity across our fundraising teams hold us back from increasing our fundraising potential? Mayram, should we start with you?
I think sometimes it does, and I'll use an example. I mean, I've been in the sector for 15 years and it's not been without its struggles. And for example, I worked at one organisation where I had a major donor who refused to answer my emails or take my telephone calls because of my name, but they were responsive to a colleague who had a British name, and so that affected the way I could fundraise and actually build and develop a relationship with them. I'm not saying everyone is like that, but yes, it can affect what you're trying to do. And this was, you know, and I'd come across it a couple of times actually. And sometimes I find it, you know, you have to go that extra mile to really build that rapport with them. And it's only when you get to face and they see you that their complete outlook changes towards you. But I even had an invitation pulled once where a colleague said, could you attend this event because I can't go and it would be a great major donor opportunity. And when I emailed to say I'd love to, I had an email that said, actually, it's full now, so we don't need you to attend. So I'd say it's a mixture, but these are live issues that I have faced within the sector over the last 15 years.
Great. And Kev, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, such a big question. I do think,
Yeah,
for example,
sorry.
no,
A powerful setup as well. I was like, come on.
No, it's good. For example, I think AC EVOs, they had a pay inequality survey which found that only 3% of chief executives who actually took part were from a BME background, and also that percentage just keeps decreasing year on year. And also 9% of the voluntary sector workforce is from a BAME background. That's fewer than 1 in 10 people. I think those are pretty damning statistics, because I feel as if a lack of diversity really does impact fundraising, because how can we possibly hope to represent society within our respective charities or organizations if our workforce is not actually reflective of the people we ultimately serve? I think it's just impossible. And I think sort of that lack of diversity, it negatively impacts fundraising in the sense of you're essentially stifling ideation. You're not actually tapping into a large fundraising space within your organization, because, you know, by having a diverse workforce, you'd be able to draw on different cultural backgrounds, you know, different lived experiences, and ultimately just having a plethora of different people's perspectives from different walks of life, and being able to, you know, cultivate those new ideas and concepts, you know, would be a massive advantage in terms of not even just our supporters, but also reaching a large pool of our supporters that we're not actively reaching. And I think that's such a big issue. But also that sense of adaptability with what's happened with COVID-19. I think having people from changing situations, changing to a situation within a charity, and being able to pull on different people with who represent different communities, essentially, that would go a long way to helping to resonate with a lot more people. And I think even just sort of working in supported care previously, sort of having calls within different organizations from people where they would hear me speak and sort of assume I was a white person, and then when they'd see my name and then talking to me via email, and they'd be, oh, you're black, and, you know, just trying to ascertain what they're really trying to get at in the conversation, and just saying, oh, I didn't expect you to sound like this or to talk like this in an email. And I think that's something that's I know other people have felt, and I think it does, that lack of diversity does really impact fundraising for me in a negative way. And I think there's so much more that we could be doing and is happening to sort of increase that.
No, I agree. And in terms, so I pulled a few different areas that just over the years I've been interested in. So we did a piece on fundraising through Ramadan a couple of years ago, and just in terms of, so Muslim and Islamic charities have always understood that community and always raised a huge amount of income from those communities since their inception. And it's only really been, I think, kind of the last 5, there may be some other charities that have been doing it a bit longer, 5 years, that organizations have actually started trying to tap into this market. And just in terms of potential, so the Muslim community during the month of Ramadan give a rate per individual at like of £38 per second, £38 per second across the month of Ramadan. So that's a huge amount. It raises a crazy amount each year. And the fact that so many charities have not had Muslim workforces means that they've not been aware of this. Now they're more aware, but they've also not been able to build authentic relationships with this community, because you can't just go, oh great, it's Ramadan, you're doing loads of giving money away, now we want to engage with you. It has to be genuine. But it's something that we've missed out on for many years, and who knows, like, people could have set up much more established programs. I know Plan UK have gone into this over I think the last few years. If someone's on a different plan, please correct me if it's been longer. But that's led to a huge amount of charities missing out on that money, particularly, diseases that disproportionately affect people from a BAME background. It's statistically true that BAME communities suffer with diabetes more. Have diabetes got a compelling ask and relationship with those communities? Prostate Cancer UK, I know, have done work around setting up relationships with men from Black backgrounds. And then also in terms of diversity across your workforce. So McKinsey did a report. I'll share links to this for everyone at the end of this. But if you have a gender diverse workforce, they measure, obviously McKinsey are a consultancy, they measure across sectors, and people that had a better gender diversity outperformed their competitors in the same market by 25%. And those that had an ethnic diverse workforce outperformed their competitors in the same area by 15% financially. So these are companies whose aim is to make money in the same way that charities' aims are to make money, who, because of their workforces, are performing better. And so it is impacting us financially, and you can tap into more markets if you actively, over years, and it is 10, 20 years worth of commitment to get people from minority backgrounds up into leadership levels. But it will then lead to more fundraising growth, more diversity. And one that isn't necessarily related to a minority, but in terms of cognitive diversity, gaming is something, and live streaming is something that everyone's tapped into during lockdown. But actually, gaming's been raising millions and millions in the US for charities, and it's because we've not had that diverse workforce where we might be actively welcoming people whose idea of a fantastic evening is sitting at home gaming. We've not had those people in our workforces, so we've not tapped into that market quick enough. So there is a real impact. So, and I know you're all on here because you care about this. I think now is the time to capitalize on it. Go back, speak to your organizations, do what you can. If you need some advice and support, we'll be running an ongoing series around this. But in terms of, that was kind of the end of our questions. Sorry guys, I don't know if you had anything else to add on to that after I just went on that little mini rant there.
So I was just going to add one thing. A couple of months ago, I went on a Muslim philanthropy course, which was absolutely brilliant, by an individual. He's the director of Orphans in Need, called Ikhlaq Hussain.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really brilliant course. And it really opened up the opportunities and how we are missing out on potential major donors, but actually connecting with that community, which is really important, and then not seeing them as being different to us. So I'm sure there's some information that's available online about the course and the benefits, because it, like you mentioned, Ashby, the Muslim philanthropy sector in the UK is worth 300 billion. But it's about diversifying the way that we think and including other communities and backgrounds as well. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah, no, great. Lovely. Okay, so in terms of questions, we've got kind of seven minutes to run through some. There are a couple I've made a note of. Kevin, Mayram, I might need you to help me here because my screen's now gone completely blank, which is wonderful. Okay. I love technology. Yeah. So I can't see anything that's happening in the chat. So if I'm not engaging with the chat, please don't feel like I've been ignoring you. There was one question around how do you approach resistance to outlining that there's a lack of diversity in your organizations. Do either of you have any experience with this? What would you suggest?
Sorry, can you repeat that for me, Ashley?
Yes, in terms of when you flag with your senior leadership team, this organisation is not very diverse, what are we doing about that? And they initially push back or aren't very keen to do anything or make any changes. It's a tough.
It's a tough one. I think if you're really passionate about it, and there's a group of you that has a strong case for support, then it's about, if you can't get through to a particular individual, who can you? So say you want to reach your CEO, who has a really strong relationship with them internally that you've also developed internally, that you can use that relationship to really get that in front of them. So sometimes it's also about you know, mapping out your internal relationships to achieve what you'd like to achieve. And also kind of getting your allies together internally and becoming that group and force of nature. So that's the approach I would take.
That's a very major donor approach, isn't it? Leverage those peer-to-peer asks. I love
yes,
it.
Of course.
Kev, anything you would add that's different from that?
Yeah, I think literally echoing a lot of what Mayra said. I think what she said is so spot on. I think that sense of finding your allies within a charity and also sort of looking at your sort of diversity and inclusion policies, find out what you can actually do and seeing if you feel comfortable enough to as Mayra said, to sort of speak to your different allies who you've been able to sort of find a common goal on this, and seeing if you can liaise with your HR teams, and also just counterbalancing that with what's actually in your diversity and inclusion policy, and also highlighting what's not in it and making a case for support, because I think nobody should be able to be stifled, and I understand that sense of being scared to, in case you are trying to sort of push this message and the people higher up are essentially saying no, but finding out your rights as well and knowing that verbatim, I think will go a long way. And yeah, just finding your allies.
Great. Okay, perfect. And then I know a couple of people asked around sites to advertise jobs on, so that I would recommend general sites. So they are things like Indeed or Monster, work for so many other sectors. The only thing I would caveat with that is expect a lot of non-sector candidates. So I think for any roles under probably 30k or, you know, officer levels, even sometimes senior officer levels, we have to be a bit more open into not just having someone that's been an assistant and officer within the sector. There's not loads of minority candidates out there that we've not heard about, or who have been in fundraising and just aren't applying for roles. You have to just also, alongside advertising in those new places, you have to open your minds a little bit more to, okay, well, actually, if they've worked in sales or they've been in recruitment, they can probably build relationships. You know, we can help them transfer in. And it is then, this is a long-term goal. We can't have head level people just, I guess, appearing from nowhere. It will be the people that we're now hiring as officers and executives and assistants that will go on and feed that pipeline. But it's a 10-year investment, I would say. It is just advertising those places and then keeping an open mind. Guys, any of the other questions that we've probably got time for one more. Any other questions that you want to pick out from the ones that are popping up that I can't see?
So Kevin, you've got one that says that the Guardian job listings weren't promoting environments. Can you recommend any way you and your friends felt recruitment was more welcoming?
Yeah, so I think even on that, I think previously, in terms of the Guardian, that was sort of years ago, but I think it's become a lot better in relation to the Guardian. But also, I think different channels that I used previously, which were really helpful, sort of Adzuna, obviously the usual ones like Indeed. I think CV Jobs, I think that was really, really good. I think, and CV Library, I found was really, really good for a lot of people, because we actually got feedback, even though I can envision with different application going forward, it is quite difficult, but I think being able to give feedback in relation to what you've done well or not done well, I think that goes a massive way. But I know that's in contradiction with sort of timing and the amount of people who can. But I think those 3 or 4 that I said, I found them really useful, and a lot of my friends did as well.
Yeah, great.
And also, sorry, I just add into that as well that I know that there's been a lot of sort of messages with my name in terms of asking for different queries and questions. I will send a link from my email address as well, and also my LinkedIn, so that we can actually link in and talk more about it as well.
Fine, that's fine.
Same here. If anyone wants to link in with me, that's fine as well.
Perfect. Yep. So I'll send their LinkedIn profiles round in the wrap-up email, everyone, so that you've got them. Just be mindful they are both working, and they're both in very busy areas at the moment in terms of philanthropy and trust. So they're quite hectic. So we'll wrap up now, because I don't want us to massively overrun. Although it's been really great to see so much engagement on the chat. Definitely for the last 10 minutes, not been able to see it, but I'm sure it's all there. In terms of coming, thank you so much for attending. I really hope we've given you some kind of tangible things for you to take away. Any questions, I'll do a wrap-up email. If you've got anything, just come back to me. We can always explore in more detail. I'm aware that I didn't come back on the job advert writing in too much detail, Kerry, so we can pick up on that separately. Thank you so much, Mayram and Kevin, for featuring on this and for sharing your experiences and your insights. I will just say, so delighted to have you both. There were other people that I had approached to speak on this panel. Not that you guys aren't very special, you are, but that were actually scared to speak on this panel. So I just want to leave you with that we're still not out of that point where people who come from a minority background feel comfortable actively speaking about this subject. So just something for us all to kind of keep in mind as to where we are so far in the sector. But it's been lovely. I really hope it's been useful. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. Thank you so much, Kevin and Mayram, for joining. And I hope you all have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Right.
thank you for giving us the time as well. Thank you, everyone.
Perfect. Right, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.